Okay, so hello everybody, and look, greetings from Oxford. I hope you're all safe and well. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Chris, and I'm the Global Director of Student Recruitment for the Schools and College Division within Oxford International. And I'd like to add a very warm welcome from me following David's inspirational words during the opening session of the conference. We're looking forward to having two really productive, informative and enjoyable days. It now falls to me to introduce our keynote speaker, a man who is a leading authority on the UK education sector and a man for whom I'm sure you will have many questions. Indeed, we've received many questions in advance. So if you would like to pose a question, please post it in the chat and we'll do our best to secure you with a response. So this gentleman was the head at Harrow for 12 years. He taught at Eton for 12 years. He was educated at the University of Oxford. He received an award for education from the University of Cambridge. He was awarded a CBE for services to education by Queen Elizabeth II. He is the chairman of the Independent Schools Council, overseeing lobbying, research, press and legal advice for over 1,200 UK schools. He is a passionate advocate for the independent school sector. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce you all to Mr. Barnaby Lenon.
Well, hello everybody. Very nice to speak to you. I am in Oxford as well today. You may or may not know that this week is a very important week in the history of schools in England because schools reopened yesterday, having been closed since before Christmas. It was a very, very successful day in all schools across the country. So today I'm going to talk to you about UK schools, things to look for if you're a parent or an agent, and obviously I'll say something about COVID and how things look for our schools going forward. As Chris has said, I'm chairman of the Independent Schools Council, and I'm mainly involved in the area of policy and public affairs, liaising with the United Kingdom government. And I've got an office right by the Houses of Parliament in Westminster. And during this COVID pandemic, actually one of the most important things we've been doing is forcing the government to make clear decisions about boarding schools in England, because inevitably most of the schools that the government is thinking about are government schools, and when they publish the rules and regulations relating to the behaviour of schools and children and parents, they quite often forget to talk about the very specific requirements of boarding schools. And we've been jogging them along all the way, and actually boarding schools have been in many respects quite happy with the response of the UK government. The other thing I do, which I'm mentioning now just in case anyone has questions about it, and that is I work for Ofqual, which is the organisation which administers and manages standards in UK examinations, public examinations. So I'm delighted this morning to talk on behalf of the Oxford International Group. And for people like me who live in Oxford, we all know that there are three great Oxford International schools just up the road from me here: Doverbrooks, the Oxford Sixth Form College, and the Oxford International College. I'm very pleased to speak on behalf of them. So let me start by saying, why is it, in my experience, that students come from abroad to schools in the United Kingdom? It's a pretty obvious question to start with. And I think that the main reason is, I guess, because we have very high quality schools, some of which have been going for a very long time and which are regarded as being amongst the very best in the world. I think it's partly because a lot of the pupils who come to us want to learn to speak English fluently. English is the international language, and not surprisingly, we in England tend to teach that well. Quite a lot comes simply because they want the experience of learning in another country. They want to travel, and they want to have access to a part of, or indeed the whole of, Europe. And any student who comes to Oxford, it can very easily travel to the rest of Europe. Another reason why many pupils come to study in schools in the United Kingdom is because it does make it a lot easier to get into a really good UK university if you are based here. You know, I completely understand that many students from abroad aspire to go to a UK university because they are some of the best in the world, as the league tables will tell you. And the fact is that for the top universities in this country, you know, GCSEs and A-levels are the most obvious currency. It's the currency that is known by the universities. And in the Oxford International Group schools and similar schools and colleges, you know, they are employing people who have local knowledge, teachers who have been to these universities. It just makes the whole process much easier. You're available for interviews if you're based in the United Kingdom. And so I completely get that. Our colleges and schools are a very effective route into the best UK universities. But the other thing I think, you know, is important to say right now, and that is that the country welcomes students from abroad more than it ever has, I guess, in my lifetime. I mean, in 2019, the government published its international education strategy, which has, you know, two key ambitions to achieve by 2030: to increase education exports to 35 billion UK pounds per year, and to increase the number of students coming to universities in the UK from abroad to 600,000 per year. So, you know, that's their ambition. And, you know, the UK does remain in a very competitive position on the world stage. I was reading the other day the 2020 soft power ranking published by the Higher Education Policy Institute here in Oxford, which found that over 1 in 4 countries in the world have a head of state or head of government educated in the United Kingdom. So we're second to the United States in that ranking of 56 countries. And that's because we've got a world-class education system, which obviously we are committed to maintaining. And so this government's approach to international education is rooted in a desire to build lasting and positive relationships around the world and establish the UK as the partner of choice. So you can be sure you've got a government who's on your side. And, you know, post-Brexit, there's been a new visa system, and the purpose of the new visa system is to make it easier for your students to come here. We want your students. Now, as I'm sitting in Oxford, I'd like to just say something about Oxford. I obviously chose to live in Oxford for the same reasons that you might wish to send your students to Oxford. It's a great place. It's big enough to be interesting. It's got cinemas and theatres and everything that you expect of a small city. But it's small enough to be safe. It's a pretty safe place, Oxford. It's got a lot of students, a lot of bookshops, a lot of academic activities going on. It's in a very good place geographically. It's right in the centre of England. I mean, I chose Oxford partly because it enabled me to get to other places in England very easily. It's a very interesting place for people and parents, for example, of students to come and visit. And it's a prestigious place because Oxford, in the international rankings, is the leading university in the world. So I really like Oxford as a place to live. And if I was sending my child from abroad to live somewhere in the United Kingdom, Oxford would certainly be on my list. Why would you send your child to a boarding school in the United Kingdom? I mean, I had quite a number of boys at Harrow who came to me from excellent schools, particularly I would say in Hong Kong, but some in China, some in Malaysia. They were obviously coming to me from very good schools. So I would always say to them, well, why on earth did you come? And it is some of the reasons I've given, but there are other reasons as well. They were, particularly in Hong Kong, in classes which were very large, often 40 students. And they said that what they liked about education in the United Kingdom was smaller classes, the ability to ask questions of the teacher, something which hadn't happened much before they came to the United Kingdom. They were being forced to think for themselves. They were being encouraged to work in teams. They were engaging to a greater degree in problem solving, critical thinking, analytical thinking. Some of my pupils were musicians, very, very good musicians, and they said they liked the performance opportunities at Harrow, where at their school they might be performing twice a term. At Harrow, for me, they were certainly performing twice a week, you know. So these are the kind of things. Some of the parents were interested in the non-academic opportunities, the societies, the sports, and those kind of things. But also remember that in UK boarding schools, the environment is safe. You know, if you're unsure about that aspect of it, have a look at the Independent Schools Inspectorate reports, which cover in great detail the safety arrangements for every school. And of course, our schools are academically strong. I mean, I don't need to read out to you the exam results of the Oxford International Group schools, but you can see for yourself, we're academically strong. And I hope that we all do our very best to make our schools fun and enjoyable. So that's a whole suite of reasons why my pupils anyway chose to come to the United Kingdom. I just want to say something about GCSEs and A-levels. So GCSEs and IGCSEs, which are obviously similar, were reformed in the period 2012 to 2015. And the aim of the reform of the GCSEs was to raise the standard to match the best in the world. That was quite specifically, I mean, I was on the board of Ofqual at the time, that was quite specifically the objective. And those of you who know about British public exams will know that that GCSEs are now graded from 1 to 9, and 9 was a new grade introduced to be higher than the previous top grade, A star. And so we are confident now that our GCSEs offer the opportunity for the most stretching, the most up-to-date public examination qualification in the world. That was our objective. And our A-levels were also comprehensively revised in 2015-16 by British universities who were responsible for modernizing each subject. And so now it is that in the United Kingdom, pupils take typically 3 or 4 A-levels from a tremendous choice of subject. I mean, just have a look at the websites of these schools and you'll see that they're offering 20, 30 different subjects at A-level. But the key point about A-level is depth, that they are taking our pupils to a higher level by the age of 18 than is available in any other country in the world. And so they start at university at a very high level. And I would say also, you know, shout out for the International Baccalaureate. I think it's very good, but requires a greater breadth of interest and a particular kind of work ethic, but it's a great qualification. So, and these are all available, of course, in this country. And if you're asking the question, well, what do I need if I'm going on to university? I would say for university students, you know, you need to be self-motivated, you need to be organized, you need to know how to use libraries, you need to be able to operate away from home. You know, you've got to know a little bit about things like laundry and cooking and money and socializing. And if you come to the United Kingdom for you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years before you go to university, all of those things then become second nature, including the key issue of how do you make friends, gaining confidence in an overseas environment. And then if you say, well, what are the things that you need after university? You know, what are we ultimately all about? What are we trying to develop in our pupils? I would say the answer is the development of what we call soft skills. Soft skills which are best developed in the environment of a residential school. Soft skills like, you know, I mean, I've employed hundreds, probably thousands of people. What am I looking for? I'm looking for people who are organized, hardworking, who take the initiative, people who are going to be pleasant colleagues in the workplace, people who can think for themselves, and of course, people who are going to be team players. And all of these essential soft skills are reflected in the curriculum and the ways in which we do things in UK schools. Okay, so I now want to give a bit of specific advice to parents and agents, particularly this morning, about, you know, what to think about when you're choosing a school in the United Kingdom. You know, what are the things I would say you need to do? What are the things you must not do? So if you're trying to choose a school, you have to make certain basic decisions. For example, are you interested in a school which is very academically selective? That's quite an important question. I've got 2 daughters. They're both perfectly intelligent. One, I would say, super hardworking and interested in academic work. The other, just a kind of average. And I made a mistake when she was 11 of sending her to a very academically selective school where, as a result, she was always towards the bottom of the rank order. And she got it into her head that she must be unintelligent because she was near the bottom of the rank order in one of the most academically selective schools in the country. So when she was 16, I moved her to a school with a wider academic range. And actually, funnily enough, she then found that she was near the top of the academic rank order. And this gave her tremendous confidence. So, you know, as a parent or an agent, you have to think carefully about placing children in the right academic environment for them. It does affect their motivation. The things which I think are not particularly important are, you know, is a school a single-sex school or not? I mean, I've taught in co-educational and single-sex schools. I just don't think it's the most important thing to worry about. I don't actually think it's particularly sensible to choose a school because you like the head teacher. I know that we all do that, but the fact is that, you know, it's a short-term thing. If the head teacher's that wonderful, they're probably going to go at some point. So, no, I think there are more fundamental things than that. We've got a find a school function on the Independent School Council website, which you might like to look at. Think about the apply by dates. You agents, I know that you'll be thinking about this already, but it's really important. You know, we would say, wouldn't we, Chris, apply by October, November for the following September if you possibly can. But if you've got a really good late applicant, all sensible schools leave places for good late applicants. I certainly did that at Harrow. I could have filled the school many times over, but I left places for good late applicants. But, you know, the later you leave it, the more difficult it is. Think about the age of entry. I mean, you know already that the principal ages of entry tend to be 11, 13, 60, but some schools will take at other points. Please have a good look at the inspection report. You know, every single school in the United Kingdom has a detailed inspection every few years, and for independent schools, it's the Independent School Inspectorate, ISI. It's on their website today. So that's got to be the most important point. You can look up their exam results. You can see them in the newspaper league tables. You can see them on the government performance data, where you just need to look at the Department for Education, find and compare schools in England. All the exam results are there. But I've got just a couple of warnings about that data. First of all, that the main reason why a school has very good results is because it's a highly selective school. You know, the schools at the top of the league tables tend to be in London because they've got the largest number of applicants and are very academically selective. So in addition to looking at the raw exam results, have a good look at the progress data, which you will also find in the government performance data. It's not particularly helpful that they don't include data about international GCSEs. They only stick with GCSEs, so that's a slight flaw. But nevertheless, you know, you'll look at that, you'll look at school websites, you'll look at university entry data, and you'll encourage parents to go on open days, no doubt. What about boarding schools particularly? I think just a couple of interesting points here. First of all, you know, a third of all boarders in independent schools in the United Kingdom are sixth formers. There aren't many boarders under the age of 11 these days, but there are a huge number over the age of 16. So boarding is not for sixth formers. It's not an unusual choice. It's a very common choice amongst parents in the United Kingdom as well as overseas. Obviously, you need to be sure that your child is suitable for boarding. In my experience at Harrow, the vast majority of overseas children who came to me managed incredibly well. You know, I was full of admiration actually for them coming, you know, in some of them from a one-child family, let's say, in a nice house in Hong Kong, to being in a boarding house with 70 other children in a suburb of London with different food, different climate, different expectations. Nevertheless, they fitted in brilliantly well. But you've got to ask yourself, as a parent, is your child suitable? And you want to bring them across and have a look and get them to gauge it and speak to other children that you probably know who are in a same position. The great thing I would say about boarding schools is that not only are children being looked after incredibly well, you know, medical care 24 hours a day, you know, for me at Harrow, 3,000 meals being served every day, fantastic facilities, but also it means that because you're resident in the place, you can have a very flexible timetable. You know, certainly for me at Harrow, teaching minority modern languages started at 9 o'clock every evening. my house looked down over the modern languages block. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the lights came on and children were learning subjects like Mandarin or Serbo-Croat or Japanese. And it's this flexibility that boarding gives you that I think is particularly great. Okay, now I want to say something about Brexit and COVID. So Brexit, you'll probably know more than I do, but European agents have been saying to me that Brexit isn't a big issue for them. The new visa system means a bit more paperwork for them, but it's actually quite straightforward. And as expected, really, Brexit has not proved to be any kind of issue. On the other hand, COVID has been a massive issue for all of us, as we all know. We've had a very high incidence of illness in the United Kingdom. We've had a very high death rate. And the question is, why was that? It was obviously for a number of reasons. It was because we had quite a late lockdown. It would have been better if we'd locked down 2 or 3 weeks before we did. We spent a very long time thinking about closing the borders before we actually did. So in the early days, quite a lot of people came with the illness into the country. We've got quite a dense population. We've got quite an overweight population. We hadn't done much planning or preparation for this type of illness. We had inadequate equipment. So there were a lot of reasons why the situation in the United Kingdom last year was very, very bad. But the situation now is incredibly different. You know, here I am in Oxford, where we invented what looks like the most effective vaccine available in the world, and is clearly going to be the vaccine of choice throughout much of the world over the next year. And we have been able to administer this vaccine to the population faster than any country in the world except Israel. A third of all adults have already been vaccinated. 22 million have already been vaccinated, and we only started a few weeks ago. Today, I'm pleased to announce, is the day that I become, relatively speaking, immune, because I had my vaccination 21 days ago. So it's a very big day for me. But I'm going to be joined by the rest of the population in very short measure. The expectation is that everybody aged 18 and over will be vaccinated against coronavirus by the middle of July. So things have turned around. Last year, our schools closed in March. They were closed throughout April and May. They opened a little bit in June. They were open in the autumn, but then they closed again with a second wave of the pandemic earlier this term. They were closed in January, February, and then they reopened again yesterday for pupils of all ages. So we've had 2 quite long periods of closure over the course of the last year. But the teaching online has been very, very successful. You know, but it's been difficult, of course, for many overseas pupils who either never made it back or have been having to access online teaching from overseas. And it's not ideal if you're a pupil in, let's say, Tokyo or California, where we've got an 8-hour time difference. I heard the other day of a boy who attended his previous school in China for a full school day online, and then after a quick supper, he clocked in for online registration at a UK prep school at 8:15 in the morning, attending a second full school day before returning to bed at midnight. It's crazy. But travel is going to clearly get very much easier in the coming months. It was great news only last week that borders at schools in England from the so-called red list countries can now quarantine in boarding houses rather than in government hotels. But frankly, the situation in the United Kingdom today is, as it is in many countries, quite locked down, but with the prospect of really rapid improvement in April, May, June. I mean, some of you will be asking me about, what has been the impact of COVID on independent schools generally. And the answer is it's been, not as bad as everyone thought it would be back in March 2020. I mean, in the past year, about 20 schools in my organisation have closed, but about 20 others have opened, which is more or less what it would be in a normal year. And the schools who closed were all very small and in a weak position financially already. I mean, they probably would have closed at some point in the next 5 years anyway. If a small school closes, actually, the stronger the remaining schools become, because those parents transfer to other schools. So schools like, the Oxford International Education Group schools, they become stronger if other smaller schools, sadly, have to close. But we've been very fortunate in the United Kingdom that the government has supported staff who, under what's called our furlough scheme, staff who couldn't work or didn't need to work. The government's support for them has been extremely generous. And so quite a number of staff in our schools were able to stop work for a while, still receive money, and then come back into our schools, some of them yesterday. Something about exams and the impact of COVID on exams. So last year, exams were cancelled and all schools were required to provide their own grades for their pupils, centre assessed grades. And this year, it's frankly very similar. Exams have been cancelled. Teachers are producing grades for our pupils based on school exams and school tests. Their efforts this year are going to be monitored closely by the examination boards. So although there's going to be some grade inflation, as there was last year, although teacher assessed grades are frankly much less reliable than formal exams, nevertheless, the system is in place. All teachers are going to be able to handle it perfectly well. They're all going to be carefully monitored by the exam boards to make sure their grades are honest and fair. And although I personally want to get back to formal exams because I just think they are a fairer way of assessing children, we have been able to manage something which is respectable and fair and follows the usual standards that we set for GCSE and A-level this year. Obviously, the big impact on our schools this year has been teaching online. Quite a number of people say to me, well, is this the future of our schools, teaching online? And it's true that, many parents were happy with online teaching that we produced. But the fact is that online teaching is nothing like as good as face-to-face teaching in a classroom. It's very hard for children to concentrate. It's very hard for the teachers to know whether their pupils are really engaging. It's hopeless really for personal relationships. You can't do extracurricular activities. Pastoral care is difficult. And it's a lot of work for teachers, especially if they've got some pupils in the school and some being taught online. The Higher Education Policy Institute here in Oxford did a survey of thousands of university students just the other day and asked them whether they prefer face-to-face seminars, face-to-face lectures, or whether they prefer online. And the vast majority of students said they much preferred face-to-face. I was quite surprised by that finding. I would have thought that university students would like nothing more than to sit in bed all morning and watch a recorded lecture in the afternoon. But no, the fact is that online teaching has been a great success, but it is not going to replace face-to-face teaching as the best way of communicating with young people. So before we come to the questions, just a few conclusions from me. The COVID pandemic has been really bad. It's hit the market for overseas borders this year. Online teaching has been good, but it can never be as good as face-to-face teaching. The health situation is improving more rapidly in England than in almost anywhere else in the world. We all expect that this pandemic will be no worse than flu, let's say, in our country by the late summer, let's say. Rules about admissions to the United Kingdom from abroad have been relaxed. The United Kingdom is very keen to welcome students from other countries. Our schools and universities remain the best in the world. Okay, Chris, over to you for the questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Barnaby. And look, after such a turbulent year, it's wonderful to listen to you talking about the strengths and resilience of different aspects of independent schools, and sort of giving us that positive outlook at the end there as well. So thank you very much for agreeing to take some questions. We did take a few in advance. The first one I'm going to touch upon is related to world events. So you addressed Brexit and COVID during your speech, but another significant world event took place in the US last year with the presidential elections. So what impact do you think the Biden administration will have on America's attractiveness as a study destination? And do you worry about the impact on the popularity of British boarding schools for international students?
Okay, I'm going to keep all my answers fairly short. So I think that the Biden administration can only be a good thing for international students wanting to go to America. It was quite bad under Trump. I'm not at all worried about the impact on the popularity of British boarding schools because we compete well with America. And frankly, America, the issue is not Trump or Biden, the issue is the COVID pandemic. We in the United Kingdom have got this problem solved. In America, partly because of Trump, they are still in the middle of a terrible pandemic, which is going to continue right through 2021. So in the short term, I'm afraid America is going to remain unpopular. Okay, question 2.
Okay, right, yeah, Barnaby. So yes, question 2. So yeah, relating to government actually, but this question is: does the British government support the Independent Schools Council and its school members with policies and legislation to support international students?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, that's what the Independent School Council does. It works with the government to try and make sure that they support us. And through their international education policy, which I referenced at the beginning of my talk, they are very keen on supporting British independent schools, and particularly British independent schools that take students from overseas. The new student visa route, which started in October last year, is designed to make it easier for international students to get visas, and then those who come to our universities to get work after finishing their education. As you know, those who study at UK universities are now able to stay and work for 2 years at least after graduation. And this is all part of the UK government's policy of encouraging and assisting schools that take international students and universities the same.
Fantastic. Yeah, great stuff. And for organisations like ours, it's great to see a correlation between our ambition and government policy as well, so that the change in rhetoric's hugely positive. Okay, so something related to the pandemic. I think there's a few of these questions. Barnaby, what are the characteristics of those schools who will emerge from the pandemic in a strong position?
Okay, that's an easy question to answer. The schools that will emerge from the pandemic in a good position are those that have got sensible governors or trustees making the right decisions. They tend to be in a good location, like Oxford. They're running a good and effective model of education. If they're doing that, then they're going to carry on having good demand. And if the demand is there, then they're going to be fine financially. I mean, I'm expecting most independent schools to emerge in a strong position because they've done so well during the last year. Most parents, I mean, we do surveys at the Independent Schools Council. Most parents are extremely happy with the performance of UK independent schools in terms of online provision, particularly over the past year. So most are going to emerge okay, but of course, very small, weak schools, particularly those that relied heavily on borders, will have found it more difficult.
Great start. Okay, thank you, Barnaby. The next question is, with the return of students and face-to-face teaching, many schools are likely to want to return to their pre-COVID ways of doing things. Which adaptations to teaching and learning that independent schools have made because of COVID do you think will be here to stay?
Well, I think that, many of us have done very little online before last March 2020. Now we all know how to do online effectively. It's inevitable that aspects of online will remain with us. I can think of three things immediately off the top of my head. I think online communication in terms of extension tasks, for example. Let's imagine, you've got a group of pupils coming up to exams and you want to communicate with them in the middle of the holidays, as you might well want to do, online. Secondly, online provision for children who miss school for some other reason. Maybe they're ill. A child who was ill and away for weeks on end in the past might have received the odd phone call, but now they can actually, if they wish to, attend lessons. If you've got a webcam in your classroom, they can be attending lessons. That must be a fantastic thing. Thirdly, online parents' meetings. Many schools have said they're never going to go back to face-to-face parents' meetings because they so hate them, and they found that the online version was so much better. So I think that might happen. I think also, I would say this, that as things are at the moment, we've had public examinations cancelled slightly unexpectedly 2 years in a row. I think that teachers over the next year or two will be aware of that and will be focusing on assessment across the whole course, just in case this happens again. I mean, we don't quite know, do we, as a world, what's going to happen next October, November, December. We're obviously not going to have anything like the situation that we had last year because of the vaccine. But I think that, I think if I was a teacher now, I would make sure that I was assessing my pupils across the whole course in the light of events of the past two examination periods. So these are all very important adaptations.
Yeah, and very reassuring, I think, for us all to understand that there are going to be some robust contingency plans in place, Barnaby. And I'm sure for the international audience, it's great to hear that online parent consultations are a thing of the future. It gives greater accessibility to those parents of students who are from overseas. So yeah, that's wonderful to hear. Actually, I had a related question on the chat. Which relates, I think, more to the environment that the schools will provide. So the question is, will there be any changes to the teaching and study environment at independent boarding schools post COVID-19? So perhaps the physical environment, do we anticipate differences there?
Well, I think that's a question for you, Chris. But my knowledge, I mean, obviously I'm in touch with 1,300 schools, and my knowledge of them is that at the moment they're operating under government COVID guidelines, which means that there are changes in the way things are operating, but we are expecting all those to be fully relaxed by June. So I don't see any long-term change, but I may be wrong there. What about you, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, we follow the government guidance at the moment, and we probably go above and beyond in some areas. I think particularly where we've got a high concentration of international students within certain schools, we listen to our agents, listen to our partners, and therefore with policies such as mask wearing, I think we're probably stricter than other schools might be. The physical configuration of the schools, I'll probably have to pass that one over to the principals, but certainly at the moment, obviously, we've got additional spaces that we've created, so some marquees and some external places that we probably won't be keeping longer term. But for the time being, we're just doing everything that we can to ensure that we've got a safe, secure environment, and one that continues to be conducive for study.
One thing I would say, and that is that at the beginning of the pandemic, people were worried that boarding schools might be the most unsafe places because you had dense groupings of pupils 24 hours a day. But interestingly, looking back over the past year, boarding schools have been some of the safest places because they were all being kept together and being carefully managed 24 hours a day. Whereas, pupils at day schools, for example, were getting on public transport and traveling home. And the incidence of COVID in UK boarding schools has been incredibly low. And as you've just said, Chris, boarding schools implemented very good safety systems right from the beginning. And these have undoubtedly worked. Boarding schools have turned out to be very safe places, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's that controllable environment, isn't it, Barnaby?
I think that's it. Yeah,
gives that advantage. Yeah, absolutely. Barnaby, what do you think the sector will look like in the next 10 years?
Well, I think 10 years in the history of education is not a very long time. I think that the schools will still be very strong. I think some smaller schools will have closed or will have merged, so there will be fewer larger schools. So in terms of my Independent Schools Council membership, I'm expecting to have the same or more pupils, but fewer schools, fewer larger schools, fewer, larger schools. I think that we will continue to focus on what parents particularly want, and especially those things that state schools, government schools don't provide. I think there'll be more focus on soft skills, but I don't believe myself in those people who think that there'll be very dramatic changes. I don't, for example, believe in abandoning exams. I don't believe in abandoning traditional school subjects. I mean, I can elaborate on that if someone wants to ask me, but I think that, I have worked in schools that are hundreds of years old, and maintaining traditional ways of doing things can be a bad thing, but is very often a good thing, because those schools have worked out over a long period of time what works well. So there will be changes, but not as big as some people think.
Okay, well, yeah, that again provides some reassurance, I think, for our audience. I mean, just to touch upon your time at a school which is hundreds of years old, what do you think were the key reasons for your success during your time at Harrow?
Well, I think that's a thank you for that pleasant question. I think the important thing is to provide what parents want, provide what parents are expecting. For me, the most important thing was to beat Eton at sport. So making sure that that in the key sports of sort of, you know, football and rugby and athletics and cricket, we did the best we could, and that meant beating Eton most of the time. Secondly, that we should get very good exam results and move steadily up the league tables, which we did without damaging the basic ethos of the school. And because, you know, because Harrow is a full boarding school just for boys, you know, it's a very particular type of school. I think focusing on a wide range of activity outside the classroom and compelling every pupil to be engaged, you know, so that they were always occupied, usefully occupied in worthwhile activities, and providing, you know, a high quality of pastoral care. Actually, of course, that's what you have to have in any residential environment these days. So, and the only other thing I would say, and that is that I'm a fairly impatient person. So when I started at Harrow, I demanded really quick response to these objectives. I'm a believer in quick change, actually, which not everyone likes, but, you know, children only have one chance.
Excellent. Yeah, well, like some great ingredients for success there. And yeah, look, I think we're all aware of the importance of leadership within education. There's I think probably enough time maybe for two more questions now, Barnaby. So I've got a couple which are interlinked. One of which has come through on the chat, and the first of the, well, I suppose there's two parts to this question really. So will international students have a chance to get a vaccine? And also, will international students be expected to have a passport vaccine when they come to the UK? I'm not sure if you're able to answer both of those questions, but if you have any insights, I'm sure the audience would be grateful.
Yeah, well, I can answer the first one. So the first one is that international students can get a vaccine. They have to be registered with an NHS doctor, which they can certainly be. Not many international students have had a vaccine yet, because we are vaccinating in the United Kingdom in age order, starting with the oldest. And at the moment, we're in the group aged 50 to 59. Not many international students are over the age of 50. But eventually we're getting right down to those who are 18 and above. And international students, you know, in age order, like everyone else in the United Kingdom, will eventually become eligible for a vaccine, yes. As for passports, this is something which has not yet been worked out, I think, anywhere in the world. Personally, I think that international vaccination passports are a very good idea, and I guess for me they are inevitable. I remember when I was a young person traveling the world, we were required to carry documents such as a yellow fever vaccination, effectively a passport card, and I can't see why we shouldn't do the same again.
Okay, great, and look, congratulations on your immunity today as well, Barnaby. That was good to
Congratulate me. Congratulate the scientists in Oxford.
Okay, there have been more questions that have come through that we're probably not going to be able to get to, unfortunately. There is one here which I think is quite pertinent, will be of interest, and that is it more difficult to get into Oxbridge and other elite universities if you are from an independent school?
No, I don't think it is more. Yeah, I know that's a question obviously I'm often asked. And at the Independent Schools Council, we are in close contact with the admissions offices at Oxford and Cambridge, and many independent school governors are admissions tutors in colleges at Oxford and Cambridge. It is not more difficult. It is, of course, true that Oxford and Cambridge are able to make lower offers to pupils who come from schools that have a very poor academic record. And I think that's entirely reasonable. But we do a survey at the Independent Schools Council every year of all independent schools and ask them about their admission to Oxford and Cambridge. And what they say is that their weaker pupils who might have got into Oxford and Cambridge in the past no longer get in, but the great majority of their stronger students still get places.
Excellent, brilliant. Well, look, Barnaby, that brings us to the end of the session, and it just remains for me to say a huge thank you to you. We really appreciate you delivering this keynote speech, and it's been hugely insightful. Also, a big thank you to our wonderful audience for your time and your contributions today. For those participating in the rest of the conference, and my colleague Mark Love, who's the principal at Oxford Sixth Form College, will be looking forward to seeing you in our first school-specific workshop, which will be starting in a couple of minutes' time. So please click on the Zoom link on the right-hand side of your schedules to dial in. But from Barnaby and I, that's all for now. So we wish you a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. All the best.